Thanks, Dennis. It's really interesting and important work, so thanks for sharing that every year. And thanks to all our speakers, and you're seeing some themes and threads between all of this, and our next speakers come from Department of Environmental Conservation, the state agency, and it's Terri Lomax, Program Manager, and Maryann Fidel, Environmental Program Specialist, talking about assessment of EVOS Exxon Valdez oil spill, impacted beaches, lingering oil listed methodology. And just a quick note, I had mentioned earlier that the wilderness study area, following up on Maya's talk, is listed still as an injured area within EVOS Trustee Council, and this topic of impacted beaches is one of the reasons why, not all of them, but one of them. And then I also want to say about DEC, tying into Kelly's talk about the Tourism Best Management Practices Agreement, I want to thank DEC and other agencies, because those sections we have in the TBMP on air and water, those came directly from Terri and Maryann helped us find the right folks in DEC to inform that. So thanking you for that. And I know we're a few minutes behind, but you guys still have your full 20 minutes, and come on up, and we're happy to see you.
Great, thanks, Tim. My name is Maryann Fidel, and I'm an environmental program specialist at the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. I manage the marine water quality monitoring effort, and I also worked with the contractors on this lingering oil listing methodology. I'm a lifelong Alaskan, originally from Anchorage. Fun fact about myself is that I was a wilderness kayak ranger for the Forest Service many years ago, for about 4 years out of Whittier. So it's always nice to be back in Whittier, where it's always prettier. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Terri Lomax. I'm a statewide program manager for the Department of Environmental Conservation. I've actually been with DEC for 21 years. I really love working there. It's just a challenge every day. Every year we learn something new, and we also get to work with really amazing people like yourselves here. So we look forward to hearing your thoughts and opinions on what we're going to talk about today. With that, I'll let Maryann start.
Great. First, I'd like to acknowledge the EVOS Trustee Council for funding the work on the lingering oil listing methodology. I'd also like to thank the Prince William Sound Stewardess Foundation for putting on this wonderful event. And I'd like to thank all the scientists and technical experts that provided input into this listing methodology. The DEC's Division of Spill Prevention and Response is still the lead for oil spills. The Division of Water, where we work under it, follows up with areas after a spill has been cleaned up to them as much as possible. So the lingering oil listing methodology is the way that Division of Water will determine if a beach with lingering oil is considered clean or polluted. Let's see. The Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation's mission is conserving, improving, and protecting Alaska's natural resources and environment to enhance the health, safety, and economic and social well-being of Alaskans. One of the ways that DEC accomplishes its mission is through the integrated report. Under the Clean Water Act, the states must assess water quality every 2 years and publish an integrated water quality monitoring and assessment report, which is a mouthful, so we say integrated report. The report identifies which water bodies meet or fail water quality standards for the protection of human health and the environment. It's a report on the health of water bodies in Alaska. So waters are placed into these categories you see up here. Categories 1 and 2 are waters that are attaining all their uses, so clean. Category 3 is there's not enough information, and a lot of Alaska waters bodies fall into this category because we have a lot of water but not a lot of data often. Category 4 waters are waters that are impaired or polluted. So impaired means, but they have a recovery plan. And impaired just means that they're not attaining all their uses that we could be using them for. It's a little bit of DEC lingo. Category 5 are waters that aren't meeting water quality standards and do not yet have a water quality recovery plan. Listing methodologies are used to categorize waters into these categories. So they provide guidance on data requirements, how to analyze data, and are based on well-accepted, scientifically valid methods. They outline the data type, quality, quantity, and statistics, and they relate to water use by examining whether the water meets water quality standards for drinking, fishing, and swimming. So here's an example of how a listing methodology connects water quality standards to uses. So water uses are designated for freshwater and marine water, and there are standards or criteria for 12 pollutants. So in this example is for petroleum hydrocarbons in marine waters. And I know this is very difficult to see, but on one side are all the ways that we use marine waters. So some of them include water for seafood processing, waters for recreation like boating, waters to support aquatic life like fish, shellfish, and other wildlife. So on the one side are the thresholds that, if exceeded, would make that water unfit for the purpose. Now, lingering oil. DEC drafted this definition of lingering oil for this effort, and it has undergone review by DEC, DEC's internal counsel, and the Exxon Valdez trustee councils. This definition does not apply to freshly oiled locations from man-made spills or from naturally occurring oil seeps, nor does it apply to SPAR regulations or guidance. So lingering oil is an oil residue deposited in the shoreline sediment from an anthropogenic release that is generally not bioavailable unless disturbed. So lingering oil acts differently from other oils in three main ways. It's been in the environment a long time. It's typically buried under several inches of sediment, and unless it's disturbed, it generally doesn't interact with humans, fish, birds, or other wildlife. Now here's the second time you've seen this graphic, but here it is again. This is a timeline of recovery from EVOS, and it's been 36 years since the spill. And one of the things that we learned from EVOS is that under the right conditions, oil can linger in the environment for a very long time. When it's buried, oxygen is prevented from reaching the oil, which means that bacteria can't consume it, and it can linger for decades. Since oil is buried under sediment, it's generally separate from the environment. So in this graphic from 2014, sediment is on the end, and it's a recovering habitat. So based on model data and other data, DEC's identified 34 beaches as impaired for petroleum hydrocarbons under the Clean Water Act. Today they remain impaired, although we know that most oil has disappeared. We also know that some oil remains and will remain for a long time. These impaired beaches haven't been reviewed during the last decade. Until now, DEC didn't have a listing methodology specific to the unique characteristics of lingering oil, making it challenging, if not impossible, to evaluate these beaches. So new information exists that would allow for a reevaluation of the condition of those beaches and other beaches not yet identified. So we worked with a contractor, Geosyntec, to develop the technical approach and the listing methodology. Their team included a toxicologist, a risk assessor, a GIS expert, clean water experts, and a biologist. We started by gathering information from the vast body of EVOS research, and we looked at other spills, did a literature review, and explored what they do in other places that were thought to have similar challenges. So 5 key types of data were identified that could contribute to the assessment of lingering oil today. So they included the shoreline cleanup assessment technique, or SCAT, or test pit data, where they dig an actual hole in the ground and look for oil, sediment chemistry data, biologic data, and models that predict amount of oiling and everything else. I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So what we've done is we've taken all this data that we found available through either EVOS research or other research out there, and we are proposing the listing methodology. Listing methodology is just a systematic approach on how we're going to review the data to make that determination. When we think about that, we also have to think about what kind of quality and quantity of data do we need for that listing methodology. So we've determined a couple of data requirements. In general, we prefer data to be less than 10 years old. We also recognize this is lingering oil. It's been there for a long time. So we have to consider some older data. We're just not going to find that much newer data. But we prefer data less than 10 years old. And when we say the scale must align with the assessment unit, what we mean is the data collection efforts really must align with a defined area of beach that we call an assessment unit. So we need to have enough data within a certain area of a beach to make a determination if that area is impaired or not. How many data points do we need in that assessment area? What quality of data do we need? And what is the frequency of data collection? So those were all things we thought about as we moved forward. They are different within each tiers, and I'll go over those for you here. So what we're proposing for our listing methodology, and let me backtrack just a minute and share that we also shared this proposal with the communities of Valdez and Cordova last week. So we are reaching out right now, kind of pre-public notice, to key communities that have a direct impact from EVOS to hear from you before we actually go out for public notice on a final draft. So we're wanting to hear thoughts, make some changes before we go out with a statewide campaign, a statewide public comment period. So what we're proposing is a hierarchical approach where we have developed 5 different tiers of data that we will go through one at a time. If there's enough data in any tier, we stop, we make our determination, and we don't move forward. This process ended up being quite a bit more complicated than we intended, but that also recognizes that lingering oil is a very complicated topic. There is a lot of amazing research, but it might not be something that we can apply across all Prince William Sound. There might be a lot of data in one small area, but not a lot of data across the entire region. So instead, we have this approach where we'll look at 5 different tiers. And those tiers are test pit data. So the first thing we would ask ourselves is there 10% or less test pits with light or heavy oil based on SCAT data or test pit hole data? And if we have enough data for that, we'll make our determination. If not, we move on to the next one. The next one is sediment chemistry. So do less than 10% of the samples exceed human health criteria? And human health and wildlife protection criteria. So there is a long list of petroleum hydrocarbons, PAHs, polycyclic hydrocarbons, that we've looked at. And we've looked at low molecular weight, high molecular weight, and sort of benzopyrene human health equivalents to make a determination of what those thresholds are. So we have all of this information detailed in our technical approach document where you could see each individual threshold and how we came up with those numbers. But remember, this is per assessment unit, per little beach section, right? So do less than 10% of samples exceed that? If we have enough data, we make our determination and we move on. So that keeps going through biological, model data, and overwhelming evidence. So for biological data, we identified 4 different types or lines of evidence that we would look at to make that determination. And I can't read this, but it's things like tissue animal toxicity, food web analysis, sediment toxicity. That's in sediment chemistry. I'm drawing a blank on the other 2. Do you remember what they are?
Contaminant uptake.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So yeah, we've identified 4 lines of evidence, and we have to have enough data for at least 2 lines of evidence to make our determination. And that's because different biological communities are using the environment in different ways. So we want to make sure we're trying to be representative of different uses or different parts of the environment there. And the last one is, the 4th one is modeled data. So there is several models of lingering oil in the Prince William Sound. And so in looking at model data, we are proposing that the model must at least have outputs for 50% of our assessment unit. And if less than 10% of that beach segment does not have heavy oil and also has less than a 15% chance of probability of oiling, then it's attaining. Anything more than that, then it's impaired. So there's quite a bit more about model data as well, but that's kind of the highlights for it. And then overwhelming evidence is our last tier of data. If we've gone through this process and we have no or not enough information for each one of these, we will then move on to overwhelming evidence. So overwhelming evidence is, do we have little bits of information from all of this that is really leaning us to one way or another? We use overwhelming evidence. We have that in most of our other listing methodologies. And it's something that just allows us to make determinations when maybe we don't have a complete data set, but we have a near complete data set for each other tier. So the way this would look is, as an example here, if we have this example beach assessment, let's say we only had a few test pits dug in the 1990s. So it's the data is older than 10 years. We don't have enough to do a determination. We move on. We only have 4 sediment chemistry samples in this beach. We need 10 sediment chemistry samples. So again, we have to move on. In this case, we have some PAH samples, some tissue chemistry, but we don't have the 2 lines of evidence we need for biological. So then we move on to our model data. And in this example, only 5% of the shoreline is modeled, and we have to have 50%. So we don't have enough data in any one tier to make a determination. But putting it all together, we could use our overwhelming evidence and say each one of these potentially leads us to an impairment or an attainment and move in that direction. So just to kind of wrap this up, we are proposing to develop this listing methodology specific to lingering oil. And the reason that is like Maryann mentioned, lingering oil acts differently than freshly oiled areas. So we need to really recognize that. Due to the size and scale of the areas impacted by Prince William Sound, this effort is not something we can really do on a regular basis. There is a lot of science out there. There's a lot of data to put together. So we're very fortunate that we have the grant funding and the contractor to help us through this at this time. But we would love to hear any thoughts, concerns, ideas, something we missed from the community before we finalize our draft and move forward. This listing methodology will be applicable to the entire state. We are using Prince William Sound as our example because there's going to be more data here than anywhere else in the state. So we've used Prince William Sound to help us craft our listing methodology and the technical approach, but the idea is, again, that it would be applicable statewide. Let's see, so if you are interested in the actual listing methodology or the companion technical approach document, reach out to me or Maryann at break. We'll give you the QR code where you can find it. We also have a couple copies with us, so we can provide those or talk some of the actual specifics with you, the thresholds we've developed. We are asking for any community comments back by the 23rd. Again, this is not an official public comment period. You will have an opportunity for official public comment in the coming months as we finalize our draft and actually start an official public comment period. So you'll be hearing from us again. And have just a few minutes, let Maryann wrap up with a highlight of some of the work she's doing here in Whittier.
So I couldn't resist throwing a few slides in about marine water quality monitoring. So every summer, Alaska welcomes millions of cruise ship passengers. And so last summer, we had 1.7 million people visit Alaska by cruise ship. So this influx of visitors raises concerns about the impact of wastewater on marine water quality. So it's important to monitor marine water quality and track potential impacts. So the marine water quality monitoring program that I manage is a large one. It's 150 sample sites from Utqiagvik to Ketchikan that are visited 1 to 6 times annually. And so it produces a ton of data, and we just needed a way to visualize it and sort of make sense of this data. So we developed this new data dashboard. The QR code will take you to the website where you can find this dashboard, download the raw data, and find PDF reports about the work. But if you click on one of these parameters, it'll take you to an interactive map that'll redraw based on how you zoom. The circles are how the levels of each pollutant. And I'll tell you what time of year those samples were collected and give you a quick summary. So I just wanted to point out that resource. If anybody's interested in looking at the water quality in their area, it's a nice way to look at it. Okay, and that's all. Thank you. Any questions?
So you mentioned at the start of your thing that takes a lot of information to finally collect
I'm sorry, I
an
can't hear.
assessment.
Just a little closer.
Hold it closer to my face. Okay. It takes a lot of money to collect data. You have very limited data. Are you using best professional judgment or a rapid biological assessment to do some sediment assessments of these areas? And then, on top of that, do you have an idea of how many beaches you won't be able to hit because there's not good data, or data is not being collected?
I had a really hard time hearing him. Sorry, there was like a motorcycle going by at the same time.
I missed the last part of it too.
So we are actually not proposing to collect any new samples. We are just gathering some of the data that's already been collected by researchers out there. So really, we're not proposing our first 4 tiers of data are based on direct measurements. And so those measurements we would only go through those, and then by the time we get to overwhelming evidence, would we consider using sort of small portions of data to lead us in one direction or another, right? But we're not proposing to collect anything else. So we're just reviewing data that's already been collected. Is that what you asked at all?
Well, I was wondering if there was a technique using best professional judgment.
Oh, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's a Terri question.
Yeah, that's a Terri question. There is not a technique for best professional judgment. I will tell you that. Really, best professional judgment, we call it overwhelming evidence. It would have to be pretty compelling for DEC to consider making a listing or an attainment determination based on overwhelming evidence, because we recognize the importance and we also recognize the significance of that decision. So that's not something we would take on lightly, is using overwhelming evidence. It would be something that would be a last resort, and it would have to be very compelling in order to move forward with that.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.